Imagine a world where every step you take could be your last. The tall grass trembles. Was it the wind? Or a predator with fangs longer than your hand? At the water's edge, ripples spread. Do you dare to drink, knowing crocodiles wait just below the surface? And above, vast wings cast shadows as monstrous birds circle, hunting the weak. Now picture yourself here, not as the hunter, but as prey, small, defenseless, armed with nothing more than your bare hands and a scream. This was the reality for our ancestors nearly 4 million years ago. The question is, how did such fragile beings survive in a land ruled by giants? And more importantly, why are we alive today when they should have been wiped from history? Before we step into this brutal world, remember to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to join us on our journey through deep history. Africa in the Pliocene epoch was a continent of raw contrasts. Across eastern Africa, golden savannas stretched to the horizon, broken by rivers, shallow lakes, and scattered groves of trees. Herds of antelope, wild horses, and primitive zebras grazed under a relentless Sunday elephants, with massive tusks and hippos wallowing in riverbanks, gave the land a sense of abundance. Yet this abundance came with a cost. Predators were everywhere. This was a dangerous theatre for small upright apes called Australopithecus afarensis. They were not hunters of giants nor masters of their world. They were survivors. Their long arms and curved fingers still clung to the memory of trees, while their short legs carried them uneasily across the open ground. With brains of barely 400 cubic centimeters, they were closer to apes than humans, yet they carried within them the fragile spark of our lineage. Every moment of their lives was defined by caution. A drink at the river meant risking an ambush from crocodiles. A walk through the tall grass meant exposing themselves to leopards or saber-toothed cats. Even the skies held danger as giant birds of prey scanned for small, defenseless primates. It was a brutal balance. Predators dominated, prey lived in fear. And yet, somehow, these fragile ancestors endured. Their fight was not for dominance but for survival. Nearly 4 million years ago, on the grassy plains of East Africa, lived one of the most important species in the human story, Australopithecus afarensis. If the name sounds unfamiliar, the face of one of its most famous members may not. Lucy, discovered in 1,974 inches, Ethiopia. Lucy's fossilized bones revealed, for the first time, that our ancestors had been walking upright far earlier than anyone had believed. But what did afarensis truly look like in life? Imagine a creature just over 1 meter tall, about 3.5 feet. The average adult female weighed no more than 30 kilograms, a male only slightly larger. Their brains were tiny, no bigger than a modern chimpanzee's, roughly 400 cubic centimeters. Their faces jutted forward, with broad noses and powerful jaws for chewing fibrous roots and fruits. Long arms, curved fingers, and strong shoulders still tied them to the trees. Their pelvises and legs, however, told another story. These were habitual bipeds, able to walk upright across long distances. Walking on 2 legs was their greatest evolutionary leap and their greatest gamble. It freed their hands to carry food or stones, allowed them to travel between forest patches, and gave them a higher view above the grass to scan for danger. But it also exposed them. No longer shielded by constant tree cover, Australopithecus became visible to predators. Each step into the savanna was a risk. Life for them was neither fully arboreal nor fully terrestrial, but an uneasy compromise. By day, they foraged on the ground for tubers, nuts, seeds, and the occasional small animal. By night, they returned to the safety of branches, building crude nests of leaves to sleep in groups. The trees gave some protection from prowling cats, though leopards could climb as well. Safety was never absolute. Fossil evidence suggests they lived in social groups, perhaps 20 to 40 individuals. Infants were carried, groomed, and protected. Adults watched the horizon constantly, ready to shriek warnings at the first sign of movement in the grass. They could not overpower predators, but they could outlast them through vigilance, speed to climb, and the power of numbers. Australopithecus afarensis was no apex predator, no conqueror of its environment. It was small, vulnerable, and fragile. Yet it was also persistent. By walking upright, by learning to survive between the worlds of forest and savanna, this species carved out a place in a land ruled by giants. Without their endurance, the path to humanity would never have begun. To understand the daily life of Australopithecus afarensis, we must first understand the world they shared. It was not a human world, it was a predator's kingdom. Across the Pliocene savannas, power belonged to teeth and claws. Chief among the hunters were the saber-toothed cats. Species like Megantherion and Dinophelus were not built for long chases, but for ambush. With bodies low and muscular, they crept silently through tall grass, eyes fixed on unsuspecting prey. Their signature weapons, elongated canine teeth, sharp as daggers, were designed to pierce throats and crush windpipes. To a small hominin, a single strike meant certain death. But cats were not the only threat. Giant hyenas stalked the land in packs. Unlike today's spotted hyenas, these beasts were not primarily scavengers, they were hunters, built with bone-crushing jaws. A group of them could bring down antelope, zebras, or even young hominins caught alone. Their howls echoed across the night, a reminder that danger never slept. At the rivers and lakes, another nightmare lurked. Crocodiles, massive and ancient, glided unseen beneath the surface. For a thirsty Australopithecus, kneeling to drink could end in an instant. Fossil evidence shows bite marks on the bones of early hominins, silent testimony to sudden deaths at the water's edge. Even the skies were not safe. Gigantic birds of prey, some with wingspans over 3 meters, circled above the grasslands. To them, an infant hominin was little different from a monkey, a target to be snatched away in seconds. Mothers would huddle close, scanning the skies, their cries echoing through the trees whenever shadows passed overhead. For Australopithecus, predators were not an occasional danger, they were the fabric of existence. Every path through the grass, every descent from the trees, every sip of water carried risk. Their world was alive with movement, the twitch of grass that might be wind or a stalking cat, the ripple on the river that moment might be harmless or the shadow of jaws. Survival in this kingdom meant constant vigilance. It meant watching, listening, and learning the habits of the hunters that ruled the land. To live among giants, Australopithecus had to become experts in fear, and in using that fear to stay alive. Every sunrise brought both opportunity and risk for Australopithecus afarensis. With dawn came the cooler hours, the only time to move freely across the plains before the midday sun scorched the earth. Families stirred from their makeshift nests in the trees, stretching stiff limbs, infants clinging tightly to their mothers. Hunger was constant, and the first task of each day was always the same: to find food and water without becoming food themselves. On the ground they foraged for fruits, seeds, and edible roots. The sharp eyes of a forager could spot tubers buried beneath the soil, while nimble fingers pried insects from logs. Occasionally, they raided the nests of birds, snatching eggs before the furious parents drove them away. Yet every bite carried a cost. Leaving the safety of trees meant stepping into a killing field. Waterholes were especially dangerous. Life in the Pliocene revolved around rivers and lakes, but those same waters drew predators in great numbers. To drink was to gamble with death. Fossils tell us of crocodiles dragging the unwary into the depths, of carcasses abandoned on muddy banks after sudden attacks. Hominins approached the water in nervous groups, crouching low, scanning the rippling surface, while others stood watch, eyes darting for signs of movement. A single mistake could be fatal. Even on the open plains, survival was precarious. Tall grasses concealed leopards and saber-toothed cats. A sudden rustle could trigger panic, the troop erupting into screams, some scrambling for trees, others hurling sticks and stones in desperate defense. Fear was not weakness, it was instinct, sharpened into the only tool they truly possessed. At night, the danger deepened. Darkness turned the world into a predator's realm. Hominins huddled together in the branches of trees, building crude nests of leaves to keep infants safe. Below, the roars of lions' ancestors and the eerie laughter of hyenas carried through the night air. The stars above shone silently, but for those in the branches, the darkness below was filled with eyes. For Australopithecus, life was never secure. Each day demanded decisions: where to forage, when to drink, how far to travel, and each decision balanced between hunger and death. They lived on the razor's edge, fragile prey in a world of giants. Yet, Through constant vigilance and unity, they endured. Fear shaped them, but it also saved them, and in surviving this edge of existence, they unknowingly kept open the narrow path that would one day lead to us. For Australopithecus afarensis, trees were more than food sources, they were lifelines. In a land where predators ruled the ground, branches offered fragile but vital refuge. Each evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and shadows lengthened across the grasslands, small bands of hominins turned instinctively to the nearest grove. There, with hands and feet still well adapted for climbing, they scaled trunks and settled into the canopy. In the safety of leaves, they constructed crude sleeping nests, bundles of branches bent together, padded with foliage. Infants clung tightly to their mothers, while juveniles nestled between older siblings. The group huddled close, bodies pressed together for warmth, eyes peering into the darkness below. From these perches, they listened to the night, the distant roar of saber-toothed cats, the bone-cracking laughter of hyenas, the splash of a crocodile striking unseen prey at a riverbank. For them, these sounds were not background noise, but constant reminders of danger. Yet trees were more than safe havens at night. By day, they were escape routes. On the open ground, predators could strike in an instant, but a sprint to the base of a tree offered a chance at survival. Long, powerful arms and curved fingers allowed Australopithecus to scramble upward in seconds, gripping bark that larger predators could not. Leopards might follow, but hyenas and saber-toothed cats were left frustrated below, circling and snarling at prey just out of reach. Trees also fed them. Fruits dangled from branches, while leaves and insects provided fallback meals when other resources were scarce. By combining the bounty of the trees with the opportunities of the savanna, they created a survival strategy built on flexibility. They were neither fully arboreal like their ape cousins, nor fully terrestrial like later humans. Instead, they lived between two worlds, balancing the opportunities of the ground with the safety of the canopy. Still, safety was relative. No place was entirely secure. Fossil evidence suggests leopards may have carried young hominins into trees to feed, leaving punctured skulls as grim evidence of their power. Even in their refuge, Australopithecus could never truly relax. Safety in the trees was temporary, fragile, a pause in the unending struggle. But in that fragility lay resilience. The ability to climb, to retreat, to use height as protection allowed them to survive long enough to adapt further. The trees were their fortresses, their nurseries, their shelters. Without them, the story of survival might have ended in the jaws of predators. Instead, perched in the branches, they endured. And with each dawn, they descended again into danger, into opportunity, and into the next chapter of humanity's long and brutal journey. In the predator-filled world of 3.9 million years ago, survival for Australopithecus afarensis was never an individual effort, it was a collective struggle. A lone hominin on the savanna was little more than prey. But together, these fragile apes discovered the first sparks of something that would one day define humanity: cooperation. Fossil sites suggest they lived in small bands, perhaps 20 to 40 individuals strong. Within these groups, roles were not written in language or law but in instinct and necessity. Mothers cradled infants close to their chests, juveniles played and practiced climbing, learning balance and strength for emergencies. Adults acted as sentinels, their eyes always scanning the horizon, ears tuned to the rustle of grass or the distant call of a predator. When danger came, and it always did, the group moved as one. A leopard bursting from cover could trigger a wave of screams that echoed across the savanna. Arms rose, stones and sticks hurled through the air, throats unleashed shrill cries meant to startle and confuse. For a predator expecting panic, the sudden roar of many voices could be enough to force hesitation. In those heartbeats of hesitation lay survival. Defense was not the only gift of cooperation. Foraging itself became more efficient when done together. While some scouted for fruiting trees, others dug for tubers or cracked open nuts with stones. Discoveries were shared, not hoarded, because one stomach could not survive alone. Infants too small to climb were carried in turns, their safety entrusted to the entire band. In this way, survival was distributed across the group, lightening the burden on each individual. These acts of cooperation were more than strategies, they were seeds of trust. Grooming behaviors strengthened bonds, calming nerves in a world where anxiety was constant. Shared food reinforced connections, ensuring that even in scarcity, no one was completely abandoned. In such bonds lay resilience. When one member faltered, the others lifted the weight. Perhaps the greatest legacy of this early cooperation was teaching. Youngsters learned by watching elders choose stones to brandish, by observing how adults scanned the landscape, by mimicking the calls used to warn of predators. Knowledge flowed not through words but through imitation, a silent passing of culture that laid the foundation for everything that would follow. To modernize, their cries and gestures might appear primitive, but in those first shared defenses and communal bonds, the blueprint of humanity was forming. Australopithecus afarensis could not outfight their enemies, but by standing together, by choosing unity over isolation, they discovered a truth that would echo through millions of years. Cooperation is survival. Long before the sharp flakes of the Alderman toolkit, before the deliberate striking of stone against stone, our ancestors began to experiment with the raw materials around them. Australopithecus afarensis lived in a world where claws and fangs ruled. Yet their hands, though soft and clawless, offered a different kind of power. They had the ability to grasp, to hold, and to wield. And though they did not yet shape tools with intent, they learned to use what nature placed in their path. Imagine a thirsty band approaching a patch of hard ground, roots buried deep below. A female grips a fallen branch, hardened by sun, and thrusts it into the soil. With each push and twist, she loosens the dirt, exposing a tuber rich with calories. Others watch and imitate. The stick, simple and unshaped, has become a tool. Or picture a young male crouched over a nut with a smooth stone in his hand. With a few clumsy strikes, the shell cracks open, releasing its hidden meat. The act is primitive, but it carries profound meaning. The realization that an object can extend the power of the hand, breaking barriers that teeth alone cannot. Rocks also served as weapons. When a leopard prowled too close, bands of afarensis picked up stones and hurled them, screaming to amplify the threat. The predator might retreat, not because it feared injury, but because this chorus of noise and flying debris disrupted the certainty of its ambush. For prey as small as hominins, even a few seconds of hesitation could mean survival. These behaviors were not true toolmaking. There is little evidence that Australopithecus afarensis deliberately chipped stone into blades. Yet their grasping fingers and growing awareness of cause and effect laid the foundation for what would come. They were problem solvers, learning that objects could be extensions of the self, sticks for digging, stones for breaking, branches for defense. The significance of this shift cannot be overstated. Every time an individual cracked a place, nut, or dug a root, every time a band scattered predators with flying stones, the connection between thought and environment deepened. They were not just reacting to the world, they were beginning to shape it. In this fragile beginning, the first sparks of human ingenuity flickered. Small, fragile apes facing a world of predators had found a way to tip the balance, however slightly, in their favor. These proto-tools were not masterpieces of design, but they were enough to whisper a promise that intelligence, not strength, would define the path forward. The savannas of Africa 3.9 million years ago were theaters of constant tension, where predator and prey lived in a cycle as old as life itself. Herds of antelope-like creatures, zebras as ancient cousins, and small wild horses grazed the open plains in great numbers. Their abundance was both blessing and curse for Australopithecus afarensis. On one hand, these herds attracted predators that kept the ecosystem thriving. On the other, their presence meant that danger was never far away. When a saber-toothed cat burst from cover, it was usually one of these ungulates that fell, not a hominin. Yet for every kill, the savanna changed. The carcass left behind was more than waste, it was an opportunity. Scavenging became a lifeline for early hominins. Once the great cat had eaten its fill and retreated to the shadows, and once hyenas or vultures had stripped the obvious flesh, bold individuals could creep forward. With stones in hand, they cracked long bones to reach the rich marrow inside an energy-dense prize that few other creatures could access. It was a dangerous game. Approach too soon, and they risked becoming prey themselves. Approach too late, and there would be nothing left. The timing required patience, awareness, and courage. This delicate balance between predator and prey became part of the survival rhythm of Australopithecus. They were not hunters, but opportunists, threading their existence through the scraps of giants. The balance of life extended beyond scavenging. Predators, by thinning the herds, ensured that the plains did not collapse under overgrazing. In turn, the presence of prey kept predators from focusing entirely on small primates. Australopithecus existed in the margins of this cycle, benefiting indirectly from the abundance of herbivores while always shadowed by the risk of becoming collateral. At night, this balance played out in haunting ways. Hyenas and saber-toothed cats prowled the same spaces hominins had scavenged by day. Bones cracked under powerful jaws, the echoes drifting into the trees where families huddled. Every sound reinforced the lesson. They were not masters of their world, but participants in a delicate ecosystem where survival was a privilege, not a guarantee. And yet, from this balance came resilience. By learning to read the movements of herds, by following vultures to distant kills, by knowing when to approach and when to flee, Australopithecus honed instincts that would one day grow into intelligence. The predators provided danger, but they also provided food, lessons, and opportunities. The prey provided nourishment, but also lured killers into the grass. This was the truth of the Pliocene savanna. Survival was not about defeating predators, but about learning to live in the space between life and death, predator and prey. And in that fragile balance, the first humans endured. The world of 3.9 million years ago was not only dangerous because of predators, it was unstable because of the climate itself. Africa in the Pliocene epoch was a land of shifting extremes. Seasons could swing from abundance to scarcity in the span of years. Rivers swelled and vanished. Grasslands flourished, then withered into dust. For Australopithecus afarensis, hunger was an enemy as ruthless as any saber-toothed cat. In wet years, fruiting trees burst with figs and berries. Herds of antelope and wild horses migrated in predictable rhythms, leaving behind scraps that hominins could scavenge. In these moments, survival felt almost generous. But then came the droughts. Rains failed, rivers shrank to mud-cracked beds, and the once vast savannas became parched expanses. Herds crowded near the last remaining waterholes, and predators clustered around them, turning the few sources of life into traps. For hominins, the choices were grim. To approach water meant risking crocodiles or ambush by cats. To stay away meant dehydration and death. Hunger drove them to dig for roots with sticks, to strip bark from trees, to consume whatever scraps of protein could be found. They likely cracked bones scavenged from carcasses, sucking out the last traces of marrow, while children gnawed fibrous stems for any trace of moisture. Climate change was not abstract for them, it was immediate and merciless. Fossil records from ancient lakebeds reveal cycles of expansion and contraction, evidence of ecosystems in constant flux. When lush grasslands retreated, forests thinned, and prey disappeared, Australopithecus was forced into greater risk. Longer treks across the open savanna exposed them more often to predators. Starvation made them bolder, perhaps approaching kills sooner, shouting and hurling stones to drive scavengers away. Every gamble was dangerous, but hunger left no other option. And yet, this crucible of scarcity shaped them. The constant pressure to adapt, to shift diets, to travel farther, to cooperate more closely, was an evolutionary training ground. Those who could not bend to the rhythms of the changing earth perished. Those who adapted endured. In this way, hunger became both curse and teacher. It punished the weak, but it forged resilience in the survivors. It taught early humans to live not only with predators but with the land itself, to recognize patterns in rain and drought, to move when resources vanished. And though they could not know it, these lessons of scarcity would echo for millions of years, preparing their descendants for every challenge still to come. For Australopithecus afarensis, danger did not only come from fangs and claws, sometimes the greatest threat came from their own fragility. Small in number and scattered across East Africa, their survival balanced on a knife's edge. Every drought, every outbreak of disease, every predator strike risked wiping out an entire band. These moments, when their population dipped precariously low, were evolutionary bottlenecks, tests that decided whether their lineage would continue or vanish forever. A typical group may have numbered no more than 20 or 30. Within such fragile circles, the loss of even a few adults could cripple survival. A leopard dragging away a female meant not just one death, but the loss of her infant as well. A crocodile strike at the river could steal a crucial forager. Illness, injury, or simple accidents could ripple through a troop with devastating effects. Unlike the vast herds of antelope that could replenish quickly, hominin groups reproduce slowly. Each child took years to grow, years of constant care. Fossil evidence reveals stories of these hardships. Skeletal remains show broken bones that only partially healed, teeth worn down from chewing tough roots, even puncture marks from predator attacks. Many individuals likely did not survive into adulthood, and yet some did, evidence that their groups supported the injured, carrying them along or protecting them until recovery. Cooperation wasn't just a strategy, it was the only reason their fragile numbers didn't collapse entirely. But bottlenecks were relentless. Climate shifts forced groups to migrate into unfamiliar territories where rival predators dominated. Droughts shrank food supplies, pushing families into conflict with other bands of their own species. Competition, both external and internal, squeezed them further. At times, survival must have felt impossible, every day a coin toss between endurance and extinction. And yet, these near misses forged resilience. Each bottleneck filtered the population, allowing only those most adaptable, most cooperative, most watchful to pass on their traits. Fear became sharper, instincts keener. Those who remembered where roots grew deep or which paths led to safer waterholes carried knowledge that ensured survival for the next generation. The story of Australopithecus afarensis is not one of triumph over the savanna, it is a story of persistence through catastrophe. Again and again, their numbers must have dwindled, only to rise slowly, precariously, with each fragile success. They lived with extinction always close at hand. But each time they endured a bottleneck, they carried forward the seed of something greater, the ability to survive against odds that should have erased them. For Australopithecus afarensis, predators were not just enemies, they were relentless teachers. Each hunt, each chase, each narrow escape pressed lessons into their bones. In a world ruled by giants, survival meant adaptation, and it was this constant pressure that forged traits which would echo across millions of years. Every time a saber-toothed cat crouched in the tall grass, hominins learned vigilance. Their eyes grew sharper to detect the faintest ripple of movement, their ears attuned to subtle sounds that marked danger. Fear was constant, but it was also a tool, an internal alarm system that sharpened reflexes and bound groups together in shared awareness. When giant hyenas prowled near their nests, bands of Australopithecus screamed and hurled stones. These desperate defenses were more than panic, they were rehearsals for future strategy. The simple act of standing together, of amplifying their presence through sound and motion, planted the seeds of cooperation that would one day become language, culture, and organized defense. Predators forced them to discover strength not in muscle, but in unity. The threat of crocodiles lurking at the rivers honed caution. No one approached water without others watching, scanning for ripples and shadows. These rituals of safety were proto-rules, early forms of shared behavior that protected the group. In this way, predators did what no gentle environment could have accomplished. They carved order out of fear. Even hunger, sharpened by climate shifts, drove them into predator territory to scavenge carcasses. Each risk taken at a kill site reinforced courage and planning. Waiting for the right moment, watching vultures for signals, timing their approach, all of it required awareness that went beyond instinct. These lessons, born in danger, pushed their minds toward intelligence. The gift of predators was paradoxical. They killed, yet in killing, they shaped survivors. They thinned the reckless, but in doing so, rewarded the cautious and the cooperative. They drove Australopithecus into the trees at night, yet in those branches families huddled together, forging bonds of trust that would carry the species forward. Without predators, there might have been no reason to adapt, no reason to sharpen awareness, no pressure to work together, no crucible to transform fragile apes into resilient ancestors. The brutal fight for survival did not just test them, it sculpted them. And so, the predator's greatest legacy was not fear, but resilience. They gave our ancestors the instincts that still echo within us, the tightening of the chest at sudden movement in the dark, the comfort of gathering in groups, the awareness that vigilance saves lives. In the end, the predators did not erase Australopithecus afarensis. They prepared them for every step that would follow. Long before humans built cities or shaped fire, our ancestors lived under the constant shadow of death. At 3.9 million years ago, Australopithecus afarensis walked a razor's edge between life and extinction. They were small, vulnerable, and surrounded by predators larger, faster, and deadlier than themselves. Yet, they did not vanish. Instead, they endured. They climbed trees when danger closed in. They screamed together to drive away attackers. They learned to wield sticks and stones, not as hunters but as survivors. Hunger forced them to take risks, and fear bound them into groups. Every scar left by a predator, every child carried through the savannah, every shared cry in the night, these were the first chapters of humanity's story. Predators ruled the land, but their pressure became a gift. They sharpened vigilance. They forced cooperation. They drove fragile apes to take the first steps toward ingenuity. In that brutal world, weakness transformed into resilience, and survival itself became an act of rebellion. We, the descendants of those frightened apes, carry their legacy still. The instinct to look over our shoulder in darkness, the comfort we feel in groups, the restless urge to adapt, these are echoes of the savannas where Australopithecus fought to endure. They never knew what future they were shaping. They only knew that life was worth holding on to, even against impossible odds. And because they chose again and again not to surrender, we stand here today. Their story reminds us of a truth as old as time. Survival is never guaranteed, but resilience can defy extinction. They were small against giants, but they did not fall. If you've enjoyed this journey back to humanity's beginnings, don't forget to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to our channel for more epic explorations of the deep human past. Your support keeps this story alive, just as our ancestors once kept the fire of survival burning against all odds.